We're just talking about eBay. What did you discover on eBay?
So this summer 2023, I was in a production of Into the Woods at the Guthrie. And one day I walk out after the show, and sometimes people stick around because they want to meet actors, but there's like this group of dudes, probably in their 30s. They just have all this stuff, and they're like, "Hey, do you mind signing a few things?" And I was like, "Sure." And they don't hand me the program from the show. They hand me a stack of screen grabs from my appearance on Stranger Things. And I was like, okay, sure. Then I sign and I keep signing and signing. And then they switch to a different picture and I keep signing and signing. I'm like, well, what is this for? They're like, we try to collect every character. And then we trade them out. I was like, okay. And they're like, do you want one of these? And they were like nice prints. I was like, sure, I'll take a couple of prints. I did not sign myself for myself. A few weeks later, I looked for it and I figured maybe it would be on eBay based on what another actor told me where it would be. And lo and behold, I can buy a picture of myself signed. I think I'm like $45.
45. Oh, hey, that's not bad.
It's not bad. But I wasn't the only one because our show actually had a number of actors who had done some culty stuff. One actor was in Twilight. Another actress was in this CBS show. So they just had tons of pictures. They chased a bunch of people down to get their photos. And I guess this is pretty common.
Does that mean you've made it now?
Yes, I can stop. I'm done.
You can go to cons, sign an autograph. Welcome to another episode of Propellant Minnesota, where we explore interesting storytellers, creators, and brand builders shaping the entertainment, entrepreneurial, and tech scenes in this great state. My name is Matt Osterman. I'm a filmmaker, entrepreneur, and professional overthinker. My brain is like a browser with way too many tabs open. I'm excited to talk about one of those open tabs today, and his name is Sasha Andreev. With a background that spans theater, film, and television, including a role on the hit Netflix series Stranger Things, hosting the popular show Curb Appeal on HGTV, and kicking butt on numerous local theater stages, Sasha continues to push himself and his craft to new heights. Please join me in welcoming Sasha.
I always tell young performers, like who are in college or just starting out, that throw every dart you have and see what lands. And in the process, you'll figure out what you're good at, what you're not good at. And some of those things take time to get better, obviously, but because I think especially younger people who have the idealism of doing a specific type of thing, that's what they're setting out to do. Like, if that's what drives you, by all means, go for it. But I think especially here in the Twin Cities, where we don't necessarily have a huge film market or a huge narrative TV market, you kind of have to find ways to utilize your performing skills in a variety of ways, which can include on stage, could include a film or even some sort of a TV thing that happens, but also voiceover, also commercials, also like corporate videos, industrials, print. All of those things exist. And I learned a long time ago, like you come across, images in a magazine of George Clooney selling Nespresso. He's paying his mortgage by selling a coffee machine.
I mean, probably his third mortgage, but yes.
His third mortgage, maybe his fourth. But it's still the same thing. That's the diversification or the omnivorous approach, as you called it, in order to like have all these irons in the fire to make, your career. So I've been fortunate, and also maybe just it's sort of natural for me to try to constantly be doing something, because otherwise I get really down on myself if I'm not constantly involved in something. And I certainly have periods where I'm not doing much. And so many people in my life remind me that, like, that's okay. That's normal for that to happen. But I immediately feel like kind of like a failure because I'm not in a show or bringing in some sort of income. And I struggle with that. That's actually like a big thing for me to have to like grapple with all the time.
Out of most actors in this market, you've done that so incredibly well, bouncing between stage and film and TV and commercials. How did you get to be so good at so many different things?
It's funny. I don't know. I don't consider myself that good. I feel like I get by. It's because I'm always the mentality. As soon as I think I'm good, I am immediately going to like trip and fall. So, but thank you. I think it's interesting. So the very first job I had when I moved to the Twin Cities from after spending a year at Actors Theater of Louisville, which is a big regional theater down south, where I had an apprenticeship. I just knew that I needed to save up a bunch of money, and I thought I was here temporarily. So I became a door-to-door salesman. I found this job on, I don't remember, through a newspaper or online, and it was pure commission, and I would go door-to-door to, businesses, essentially chatting up secretaries, selling spa packages. And we learned as part of our sort of morning trainings that we had, our little sales meetings, that like every no gets you closer to a yes, and should expect for every 10 no's, you'll get one yes on average. So that mentality early on in my impressionable age of 23, I actually think made a huge difference in priming me and programming me to just constantly pursue, because that's the way you stay afloat. That's the way you make your commission, because we had no hourly pay. And I think that certainly is part of it. I've also just been somebody who has major FOMO, so I'm always trying to what's going on over there? What's going to happen here? Well, I want to go over there. So I think that the way that I'm sort of wired, combined with even that job and particularly, made me very fearless, especially early on, to just go ask the question, see what that opportunity is about. So I often think that I fall ass backwards into things, but I'm sure on some level I did whatever legwork without even noticing that led me into certain things.
Well, I mean, you're putting yourself out there, right? You're not hiding, in your basement waiting for opportunity to.
I've certainly had those moments. I've certainly checked my email obsessively, why aren't all the things that I want to happen happening? Nothing's happening. You get into those modes too. So
you've reached a point in your career where the phone rings, right? But early on in your career, it probably was a little more difficult. And I'm sure there's even points now where the phone stops ringing and you're like, when's that going to happen? But what did you do early in your career to really get yourself out there?
Well, early on, I remember literally walking into agencies, which you're not supposed to do. But I'm like, hello, my name is Sasha. I'm new to town. I was in the neighborhood. I'm not sure what the protocols are, but I have my headshot and I'm looking for a presentation. And I was hunky-dory enough, I guess, where they're like, oh, sure, come on in. Yeah, sit down. And they would look at my stuff and they would meet me and they're like, or occasionally they would do actually email us or send this, and I'd be like, okay. But I would just sort of always push the limit a little bit, by just hello, doing it in person. Don't be afraid to ask and I'm the kind of person where my friends will if we're on a trip or something, or even when I've toured, they're like, hey Sasha, can you get us all late checkout? Or there's breakfast here. Can you find out if we can get it for free somehow? Send Sasha, do that. He'll do it. He'll figure that out. Because
You're not afraid to ask.
I'm not afraid to ask. And maybe there's a certain way you go about it where I've been waiting for that, whatever that thing is, to wear off, because I think when you're kind of a young, bright, bushy-tailed person, you can get away with it a little bit easier than an old, haggard man that I'm becoming. But
you can smell the desperation.
But I'm grasping on. So I think I wasn't afraid to walk in the door, to be slightly annoying, honestly. A lot of times when I would hear that somebody had an audition and I wasn't sent on it, I would send a message to the agent. I'm like, hey, I hear there's an audition happening for Target. I'm wondering if I could get seen for that. And sometimes they'd be like, oh, sure. And sometimes they're like, you're not the right type. Or they're like, oh, we filled up our slots. And then I'd be like, okay, well then I'm going to call a different agent, see if I can get it that way. Or if I know the casting director, I would just sort of push myself through that way. a little bit. And that can be annoying, and it doesn't always pay off, but sometimes it really does. And also not being afraid to be inconvenienced. Like a lot of times I can name specific projects where I got a call and say like, we need an audition right away for this thing that's shooting next week. Can you like get it in right away? And I'm like walking on the beach with my mom and brother visiting LA. And I'd be like, there's a giant like electrical transformer thing right here that's a flat background. Grab the phone. Let me just put it into my teleprompter app. Just hold this thing. I'm going to read it really quick. I read it, send it off, and then you book it.
You mentioned rules about working and thriving in a small market. Can you expound upon that further? Like what sort of rules are you talking about?
Like you want to go through the process that's listed on their website, whether like, please email us your headshot to fill out this form. But then like, well, I don't want to be stuck in the mix. So like, well, who do I know who's represented by them? Can I talk to them? Can they send an email for me? You just sort of, it helps to not being afraid to talk to people and also ask like, hey, I want to, like, do you work with this particular agencies? Do you mind sending an email on my behalf? And I did that when I have sort of tried out things in LA and New York. And they certainly, and actually through that process did pay off, because obviously the people that you knew, that you talked to, that you asked kindly, gave me a little bit, like maybe didn't open the door all the way, but they cracked it open. So, I mean, like that's one of the rules. I don't know, sometimes like it's that idea of asking, I guess. Like even with theater, if there's a show I want to work on, I always email them like before, whether they've called me or not. Like at the Guthrie, for example, I'm like, hey, I'm really interested in the show. Please keep me in mind.
Yeah, you're showing initiative,
yes,
right? And I think people are attracted to that. You can go too far, right?
Mm-hmm,
and
absolutely.
And there can be too many phone calls and doing end arounds with people that might know somebody. But initiative means everything.
And I think it's actually easier when you're younger, because if you do accidentally annoy someone or offend them, you have the benefit of youth and inexperience, and that you didn't know better. Sometimes it's better to apologize after, as opposed to ask for permission before. Mm-hmm.
Any other sorts of challenges you've come across, being that it is like a medium-sized swimming pool?
Well, I know what, like my frustrations with our market is that I wish there was more narrative film and television work shot here. Like if that's what you want to work in, this is a hard place to be. And there's certainly a film community that is very reliant on, I think, who people know, and it feels a little cliquey. And I think that's the case probably in the industry in general, but because it's so much smaller and in certain ways feels almost insular, if you don't know of a certain project shooting, you might be right for it, but they're not really like having public auditions for it. They're just asking their friends. So I feel like the one thing that I mean, it's not too late. Like I'm not on my deathbed. So like there's still time to figure it out. But like, I feel like I never fully cracked like the Minneapolis, St. Paul film scene as much as I perceive other people to have done. So that is certainly a challenge. And part of that is also like being super social and like going to these events and film festivals. And I would say that is the thing that I could do better myself. And with the pandemic that hurt and it became harder, and you find your way back. So that certainly has been a challenge for me, because I haven't felt like as tapped in as I could be in that particular market, or that specific portion of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, film is weird because they're often, film projects are created in silos, right? Where it's not necessarily a community effort. Oftentimes you don't know about it until it's coming out. And
you and I have talked about this, because that's been a frustration for you too, is that how do we engage more people? Because film, and actually theater in certain ways, like is siloed, because there are people who work at certain types of theaters based on their union status or based on their where they keep getting hired. And it's like, how do we intermix? Like, what are those opportunities? Because as much of a small or medium market we can be, we're a very dense market. Like, and that's amazing that there's so many talented people, but
True.
we don't always know how to find each other.
What can we do? Any ideas?
Well, I think part of it is that you have to be willing and open to going to these events. And like the Twin Cities Film Festival was just happening. I'm performing in a show right now. I don't have time to do any of it. So like it will just pass me by, and the visibility that maybe as someone in the industry that I would have gotten by going to some of these screenings and to some of the events where I was chatting with someone or being introduced to someone or someone being reminded that I exist simply by the fact that I'm there.
That's actually more important than people think.
Yes. So I oftentimes bypass those. And I think one of the things, as we get older too, it's just harder because you have kids, families, you're just tired.
Yeah.
So you have to keep like coming back to like things feel more difficult. So you have to put more effort in order to do it. So I think that's a big part of it. And I wish that, I don't know, like, and maybe this exists and I'm just unaware of it, but like there were more ways to just sort of know what's happening. Because it's really intimidating to sometimes go to an event where you won't know anybody, but it's exactly the people that you want to be around in order to advance in the career.
Yeah. I mean, I know, having cast a ton of things, I go to a bunch of events. I'll meet somebody and have a pleasant conversation, and then when casting comes up, and if I get their headshot, or I might even think of them for a potential role, and it's only because they were in front of me, right, in the last 30 to 60 days. And you can't do that not putting yourself out there. So I think there is something to be said for that. The networking piece is applicable pretty much to every industry.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
We're not immune from that.
Yeah. And following up is important too. It's funny. This is not related to acting in any way, but I was at a farmer's market and there was a guy selling this chocolate from, I guess, a local chocolatier. They source their stuff. Oh man, somewhere from South America. And I've had the chocolate before. It's delicious. I was really pleased to find out that it was from Minnesota. And I'm like, I wish I could find your chocolate more places. It's so good. He's like, oh yeah, I've left samples with this store and this store. And it's like, and then a woman overheard me and came up and like, I just want to budge in the conversation. You left samples. Did you follow up? And he was like, no. They're like, well, even if they tasted your samples and they liked them and then got distracted, they're not going to call you. You have to follow up. And then like 2 weeks later, I came up and went and bought more chocolate. And I'm like, and he was just like, hey, I followed up. They're bringing us in. We're going to have a meeting. And it's like, oh my gosh, what a simple concept.
Amazing.
Yeah. But I think that's super applicable to what we do. Just to like, you just have to be visible.
I want to try that chocolate now.
It's really good.
Yeah. Let's go way back. Can we get into your origin story a little bit? Do you
Sure.
want to kind of tell us, because it's a fascinating story. I guess it kind of start at the beginning, if you wouldn't mind.
But well, I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Russia. I lived it was still Leningrad at the time. My mom was a translator, an English teacher. And in 1989, 1990, she had been hired by this group that was like a Christian minister group that came to like bring medical supplies and do puppet shows and, you know, give out Bibles, that sort of thing. And she was just hired as like their translator guide.
An American company?
It was an American group from Minnesota.
Sure.
And my mom sort of formed a very nice relationship with them during that time and kept in touch. And basically, I think she, from as far as I know, I should really revisit the story with my mom again. I think you could feel at that time, this is before the collapse of the USSR, that something was on deck. Mm. And she wanted to get out. So she used this as an opportunity to sort of say like, hey, would you be able to, you know, create an invitation for us to come visit? So we had a visitor's visa made, and my mom and I came here in early October of 1990 with 2 large suitcases and never went back.
How long was your visa for?
3 months.
3 months.
So we stayed with this woman and her family. My mom, in that process, was able to get a religious work visa working for the ministry. So she was able to stay on that. And then eventually her fiance at the time, who was from Russia, came here as well. They got married. They had my brother. And then, she continued working. They like cleaned the church. My stepdad would like fix cars under the table for people just to like make ends meet. And
How old were you at the time?
I was 9.
So you have some pretty strong memories about that time.
It's funny. I actually don't. I think one of the things that I struggle with, and I've been talking in therapy about it, is that I don't retain memories well. I think of the past and it's incredibly murky. And I sometimes wonder whether I attribute it to how difficult some transitions I've had to go through have been, that in order to make a new reality happen, I had to wipe out the old one. So I distinctly remember just having the hardest of times moving here and living here.
I have a different theory about that. I think you and I are similar in that regard. And I'm sure there's some trauma-based stuff there too. But you're a future thinker, right? You're thinking about tomorrow, next week, next year.
That's true.
You're not focusing on the past. So people that focus on the past, they go through, they rewind, think about that thing that happened, and it's forming these concrete memories, right? I don't. I forget what I did yesterday.
Oh, do you? Okay, that's interesting. I actually think that especially as a performer, that has not helped, because when you are auditioning for things, especially if it's something that's going to be like a long-term job, whether it's in theater or you're auditioning for a film or you're auditioning for something that feels like it matters, you put so much effort into it. And then you have to, for your own sake, once you've sent that thing in or, showed up, we send everything in now, but you have to forget it ever happened. Because if you get that no, it doesn't hurt as much when you've forgotten. And if you get the yes, then it's a lovely surprise. That's sort of been my approach. But I think you train your brain doing that enough where they're like, well, I'm done with this thing, moving on. Yeah. And all our jobs last anywhere from a day to maybe a couple months. So I, in my 16 years of doing this, 17, have had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs. I don't remember most of them because you do it and you're like, I got to move on, next thing.
And you've probably had more no's than jobs.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
And so if you don't remember the jobs, you certainly don't remember the no's.
Yeah, if you remember all the no's. There are a couple of no's I remember that are
a few
really
that
hurt.
sting.
They sting, yeah. So I think part of it is that. So, but yeah, I don't remember a huge amount of living in Russia. I remember glimpses of things, but I also wonder whether some of those memories are based on photos I've seen. But yeah, we moved to Minnesota. And then my father immigrated separately to New York. And after 5 years in Minnesota, I went to visit him in New York, thinking that he was just there for a short visit to see me. And he was like fully settled in an apartment. And I'm like, what's happening? And he's like, oh, you're going to live with me now. I'm like, excuse me? What?
Hello?
Yeah. I haven't been given an option here. So that summer we went and looked at schools, and we made a deal that if I got into one of the schools, I would stay, but if I didn't go into the school, get into the schools, then I'd go back to Minnesota.
And they probably knew you were going to get.
Well, the two schools one was like a super rigorous academic magnet school called Stuyvesant High School. That was like, you have to take this big exam to get into. They say it's harder to get into than like Harvard. And then the other one was the School of Performing Arts. And that test and that audition were on the same day at the same time.
No kidding.
It was like straight out of a movie. So I took the test at Stuyvesant, for which I prepared and studied. I could have sabotaged this whole thing, but I'm like, no, I'm going to put in the effort. And then my father picked me up, drove me up to LaGuardia, because we went from the Lower West Side, Tribeca area, to the Upper West Side where LaGuardia is, School of Performing Arts. We get in there, there's no one around. It's empty. And I was like, we missed it. We missed the audition. And then we're like trying to just flag someone down. And they're like, hi, I'm here for this audition. They knew I was coming late. They're like, and I remember, I don't remember, it was like a janitor or someone. They're like, oh, they're waiting for you this way. So I'm the only person. It's like in a movie.
Surreal.
Like I'm the only person in this school. Like I walk in and we walk into this classroom and there's like a panel of like 5 people or something waiting.
Wow.
And they're like, hi. I'm like, I'm so sorry. They're like, no, show us what you have. And, I sang a song and I did a monologue and then I didn't hear anything back. And I got into Stuyvesant, which was very exciting. And I'm like, well, what about the other one? Like, is it a yes or a no? So I had to like call the principal. And they're like, hi, I heard I would be told if it was a yes or a no. And they're like, oh yeah, you got it. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I have to stay in New York now. And then I actually went to each school for a day to decide.
Oh.
Like Stuyvesant started a day earlier, so I went to Stuyvesant. And then the next day I was on the way. I'm like, I got off the train, called home. I'm like, tell them I'm sick. I'm going to the other school. So I went to both schools.
Wow, that was smart to sample each
because
one.
I like to like FOMO. Like I like to taste all the stuff. I want to have all the sauces for the chicken McNuggets. You know. And one of the things that I learned that one day at Tena LaGuardia, I would have had this old Russian man as my homeroom teacher. And my dad came to pick me up that afternoon, and he actually talked to him alone. And then they pulled me in, and I'm like, I'm going to tell you something that I'm not going to tell my students until they're seniors. You probably won't make it. So go get your education. You can always be an actor in college. Because like, I was just like, which do I go to? And, so the next day I went back to Stuyvesant. Part of me regrets it for sure. I think I would have discovered things about myself and my skill sets and my personality and who I am a lot earlier, because just it was a very different type of group of people that went there. But that was the decision. And
yeah, well, what's incredible is that teacher was probably correct, but you could say that literally to every kid at that age.
Absolutely.
Because the odds aren't good.
And he told my dad while I was in the room, he's like, most of my best students are working at the restaurants down the street. And it's New York, so it's harder. But like, I'm very proud that I make my living doing the work that I do as a performer in all these different forms. Yeah, it's so funny that you ask like about like what's the, like, not a secret, but like, what do you think you've done to get to where you are? And it's like, I don't know. Like, I always joke that like the biggest things I've done, I fell into ass backwards, but I must on some level be doing the legwork. Like,
of course. Yeah, of course you are.
Sure.
I mean, there may not be a plan, but there's a direction. You have an arrow, right? And you've been traveling that path.
Yeah. But I'm the kind of person, one of my downfalls is that I often compare myself to other people, which they say you shouldn't do because everyone's in their own.
Comparison is the thief of joy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I see other people doing things that I'm not doing, and I'm like, well, how are they doing that? And I'm not. And then I get mad or down on myself. Or sometimes it sort of sparks like, well, damn it, I'm going to like it, but like you just sort of channel that energy like, okay, like I'm not doing this thing right now, but I could be next time, or I can find out, or I can ask them how they ended up doing that thing. So I try to channel, I guess, those frustrations into actually doing something about it eventually, but I will absolutely sulk and seep in the swamp of sadness. Yeah.
What's hilarious is from the outside looking in, a lot of other actors, creatives would be jealous of what you've done. But it doesn't seem like you consider yourself a success at this point.
So a question like I think a thing that I struggle with is like happiness. Because the idea of happiness also correlates with complacency for me, which isn't like super healthy because you can be happy and also keep moving forward. But like, yeah, I have a really hard time like reflecting in a positive way and just like enjoying things for long periods, because I'm afraid that if I do it for too long, I will become ignorant of a way to maintain that happiness, or that something bad will happen. This might be the Russian immigrant in me, that like something bad will always happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's
The world's out to get you.
entire books with
Everyone's
that
there to
ethos.
get everything you have. No, it's, I don't know. Like I think I'm the kind of mindset, as soon as I've attained the thing or the thing is mine, it is no longer good enough. That can be both like a positive, that like, because now I'm motivated to move forward, but it's also, but I've certainly felt that like, because I was cast in this thing, they must have lowered their standards in order to accept, in order to choose me.
You are an artist. Wow.
Which is not a healthy way to
No.
think about. But I try not to think that way. Like, but I certainly remember having those thoughts. I'm like, man, that's fucked.
I've talked about it a few times, but I feel like Minnesotans in particular, and maybe even more so in kind of the acting and arts community, have a thing called toxic humility, where we are so humble to the point where we don't feel like we deserve something.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we can't talk about it. We don't share it. We don't communicate. We don't get to celebrate our successes as well. And it feels like you suffer from the same toxic humility that a lot of other folks do, maybe even to an extreme.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I also feel like, I remember my dad teaching me a long time ago, like the importance of humility, that like bragging isn't helpful. Like I have a hard time taking compliments. Like I've had to like literally train myself to like smile and say thank you, because it feels like weird.
What do they want from me? Yeah.
Or just like, well, I don't deserve it because I couldn't have done that good of a job. I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Like it's, I mean, I deal with a lot of those things, and I think that's, and it's evolved as I've gotten older and I've gotten better at it. But it's like therapy right now.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, a lot of people talk about the pursuit of happiness, right? Like
Mhm.
you're going to get this thing and then you're going to be happy. It really is like the happiness of pursuit. If you can find a way to be happy pursuing something, it's like,
I love that.
yeah, it's kind of fun.
I mean, like, and I think you kind of have to pursue it. And I think that's why people drop out eventually, because they're tired of it. They're like, I'm so tired of constantly looking for a thing. And it gets exhausting.
You got to like the grind. If you don't like the grind, you're going to be ground.
Yeah, I'm actually, well, the funny thing is that I'm on the verge of about to start a 6-month theater contract in Florida.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'm going down to Sarasota like in mid-December. 2023.
Good timing.
That's when we are. Yeah. And I for the first time, got cast in a repertory season at a theater called Osceola Rep, which I've worked at once before. And then basically I'm doing 3 shows in a row. One, basically like one opens, you start rehearsals, then the next one, then the next one opens, you start rehearsals, the next one, which is crazy. And I'm like, one of the things that I'm most afraid of is that I will only be working and have time for one thing. And that's great. Like that feeling is terrific. I've had those moments where I'm like, I really get to focus on this. But then I'm like, but then this is also the only thing that's making me money right now. What about the other things that I'm missing out on that I could have been like, in order to like make more money? Like, but because money is a part of it, you know, like
100%.
Or just no, or like having the diversity of the types of things that you do. So I am preemptively like grieving my lack of access to multiple irons in the fire. I'll just have one iron and one fire for a while.
Yeah, but you'll get to walk on the beach while you're tending to that one fire.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the beach is a big part of it. And then also the work that I'll be doing will hopefully make up for it, because I'm working on some projects that I'm.
Yeah, I mean, tell us like about the actual work and then how you got it.
Oh, sure. Well, the theater Osceola Repertory has been around for a long time. It's one of the oldest regional equity theaters in the country, in the South specifically. It's right next to the Ringling Brothers campus, where they have the museum and like where they used to train and stuff, which is pretty cool. And an artistic director of a theater that I've worked in a number of times here in the Twin Cities, Peter Rothstein, got hired as the artistic director down there.
See at La Tida?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Theater
okay.
La Teda. So he made the hard decision. I know it was a hard one for him after 25 years of running the theater he founded to step down and take over this much larger institution with a lot more funds where he can continue, I think, his own, sort of mission of like developing new work and telling stories on a larger scale, and also using the theater as a launching point for shows that can tour nationally or go to New York or to Broadway and so forth, because that theater has been developing itself to become that. And one of the things that he promised to the community, because he had like a community forum, because he was such like a figurehead in our community here, was that he would have a casting call here, because most regional theaters around the country cast out of New York and sometimes Chicago, occasionally LA. One of the, again, limitations of living in the Twin Cities is that we have a richness of work here, but if you want to work elsewhere, it's harder to find your way to it. So he had a casting call, and I was called in, and I read for a bunch of shows, and I ended up in them.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and I would actually say the funny thing is that the auditions for it were during the tech, while I was in tech for a show this summer at the Guthrie, and that process was quite a challenge and was pretty like, not overwhelming, but like I was quite busy with it. So I'm like, I have half an hour to do this. I was like, I don't have I had like no time to even like be anxious about it or worry about it. I learned my lines. I went in, I did the thing. I'm like, thank you, I gotta go. And like, I love being in that mindset. It's hard for me to get to it, but when you don't worry as much, you just do the thing. Like sometimes it just allows you to be so much more pure with what you do in the room.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of get out of your head a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? And you just do.
Exactly.
And there's magic in that, I think.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that I would attribute to the way I ended up on Stranger Things to a very similar scenario.
Well, that's on my list of questions, so
Okay.
let's talk about that.
In 2020, my partner and I were down. We flew without telling anyone because no one was flying yet, to Vegas. Rented a camper van and like camped in a bunch of national parks in Utah, off the grid, like except you have a bed and a kitchen. And we're driving to Zion National Park, and I get an email from one of my agents here in town. We have an audition for you from Stranger Things. I was like, what? Now, I actually had auditioned for Stranger Things before through a New York agent that I had for a little while. So I was like, well, is it through them? And I was like, no. This is the casting director out of Atlanta, which does a lot of the local casting. They're looking for Russian-speaking actors. I was like, okay. And there was like 3 scenes, and they each had to be done in English with a Russian accent, and then in Russian. And some of them weren't even translated properly. So I was like, oh God, okay.
And how good is your Russian at that point?
It's pretty good. It's not amazing. My vocabulary, I would say, is limited just because I stopped learning it when I was 9. But
you don't know all the cool swear words anymore.
I know no cool swear words. That's but I speak with a pretty. I don't have much of an American accent. It's pretty clean. So. And if you watch Stranger Things, a lot of that Russian is not clean, like because there's a lot of non-Russians playing Russian people, not just in that show, but across the board. So I was like, oh my God, okay, so we have to do this. I have like 2 days. We don't have an interior space. Like, where am I gonna do this? We are staying on a campsite right inside the entrance to Zion.
Cell coverage is probably not.
Cell coverage is like 1, maybe 2 bars. I'm like, what am I going to do? And I was like, we're going to dinner that night. And I'm like, let's just find a hotel. Let me just, so I found the first motel right outside the gates to the park. And I ran up to this woman and I was like, Mr. like spa package salesman. I'm like, hi, my name is Sasha. I'm an actor, and I just got this audition for a TV show, and we're camping in here, and I don't have anywhere to be, and I'm wondering, is there any way that I could use a space that just has a blank wall anywhere here. I would only need it for a couple hours max. But if there's a conference room or something, I don't need to rent a room or anything. And she was just like, she had no idea what Stranger Things was. But she just looked at me and she was like, come back in 3 hours. I was like, okay. We went, we ate, we went back to the van. I got clothes that would look appropriate. And then with my little tripod that I brought to take pictures of us hiking, like a selfie stick thing, I got access to a conference room. With like not great lighting, but enough where I could stack some chairs, position the camera in a certain level, and did these scenes in the time that I had at like 11 p.m. and then went back to our van in pitch black with like 2 bars out of 5 of service, uploaded them one at a time for about an hour, like on dial-up level connection. And I heard nothing for 4 months. And then I got a call from my agent, like, they want to know what you look like right now. Send in a picture. So I sent in a picture. And then like 5 days later, I had a part in the show.
Amen to that hotel attendant.
Yeah.
He said, come back in 3 hours.
Just a side note, I was on tour. I was like shooting this thing for Culver's, which is like a fast food chain. And I got a call. I have an agent in Florida because I just do. And they're like, we have an audition for you for a movie. Can you, and I had recorded it. And then they call back and like, we have a callback for you. I'm like, can you send it in like right now? And I'm like in the middle of like nowhere, like Indiana or something. And we got to location at Culver's, and while the crew was setting up, because it was way too noisy, I ran to a hotel that was across the street. And I'm like, hello, I'm an actor. Can I use a corner of your lobby or someplace where it's quiet to record this audition?
Going from hotel to hotel and just asking to audition. Yeah.
And I set up my phone. I balanced it on like a stack of things. And I did a Zoom callback. Like in the middle of a lobby, like where they were like striking breakfast. And I actually booked the part, which was like nuts. So it's like, again, it's just like, hi, can you please help me? Like, you just got to do those things, and they pay off sometimes.
Well, that's 2 of your superpowers. One is making the ask, but also with your theater, experience, you have to be used to some curveballs or get ready for some curveballs, right? And perform no matter what. Someone's cell phone is going off, you got to do it. If someone's doing something at the hotel, you got to do it. Mm-hmm. And you just found a way to push through.
And sometimes, like when you have those challenging circumstances, because you're focusing so much and just literally trying to make that space happen, you don't have time to like obsess over how many times you're going to do it or your performance. Like you prepare for it, you learn it. I think I know it. You do it a few times. I'm like, all right, we got to go. I try to remember that even like when I'm doing something at home, like do not record 30 takes of this one line. Just do one. Just do like a handful, choose one and send it off, because it really won't be that much of a difference.
Yeah. You can overanalyze things and it gets a little...
I can overanalyze.
Really?
Things. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Hard to believe. Well, let's analyze the Stranger Things experience. How was that showing up? Did it feel like you're walking into a big production and you were, kind of a day player and no one was paying attention to you? Was it, give us the...
Yeah, I mean, it was during pandemic, so we were all like I think we're united by the trauma of dealing with it. Like, were you getting tested constantly? I had to test every other day for like a week prior to even showing up on set. And then I got there, I had like a little, they have a trailer with multiple spaces, and they put me up in a hotel. They had a van that would pick me up and take me to the production facility, because they have basically like a lot with all these sound stages, very much that you would find in LA. Like I got put up in a hotel downtown, a van would come pick me up. I got, fitted for my costume. I had to constantly test like every other day for COVID. They had their own labs. You're taking PCR tests and they're like processing them right there. And you were waiting for the result. And if you're cleared, then you get to go do the next thing. So I was treated very nicely. Everyone was super nice. One of the makeup artists actually formerly lived in Minnesota and worked with committee films here, so she knew people, and that was really exciting.
That's hilarious. I was just talking with somebody else about how you go on crew anywhere in the country, and there's a lot of Midwesterners because we're good workers. We get hired.
We are. That's what I hear. And yeah, I'd never been on a soundstage like that before, but it's interesting. It felt incredibly familiar. Yes, there is a giant haunted house set and a giant lab set and a giant jail pit for monsters set. And I'm looking at, oh, this is so cool, but also none of this seems that weird. And for whatever reason, and maybe because I put myself in that mindset, because I knew like this is going to be like a very big thing, just keep cool, stay cool. I just try to keep it cool because it was so exciting that I preemptively like decided to I'm just here to do my job. Like, and
but then you peed a little bit when Winona showed up.
I mean, I was just sort of like, oh, that's Winona Ryder, and that's David Harbour over there, and yeah, and there's Brett Gelman with whom I did all the scenes, and now we all have to sit here waiting for stuff to happen. So then you just sort of start like chatting. And there was different degrees of friendliness or just like willingness to engage, but a number of those actors were very kind. Winona Ryder was super cool. She was excited to hear I was from Minnesota, and
Well, isn't that where her name comes from?
it is from Winona, Minnesota, where she
Yeah.
was born. And
Yeah.
she's like, my boyfriend used to live there, and my uncle still lives there, and I come back, and this is just when the Winona, Minnesota commercial had come out, like within the year.
Oh, that's
with
right.
her.
Yep.
And then the Duffer Brothers were like, "You're from LA, right?" I was like, "No." Like, "Where are you from again?" I was like, "I'm from Minneapolis." They're like, "Are there a lot of you up there?" I'm like, "Actors or Russians or
People?
both?" I was like, they're like, "There's not a lot of Russian actors, but there are a lot of actors in Minneapolis." They're like, "Oh, well," they're like, they were very complimentary. And I was just like, all right. Like, and what's interesting is that this is something that I hadn't quite experienced before. And I think having done a lot of theater helped. You get to set, you're in costume, you're running through the scene. And the scene's in Russian too, completely. So like they have like a Russian language specialist standing by, but the entire crew gathers to watch it. And the sets are built very practically. So they have down to the ceiling. It's not like you have an open ceiling with lights. You're in the room.
So it gives them freedom to shoot in all directions.
Yeah, we were in the prison control room. We're in there. So you have like 50, 60 people standing around, and you have to play the scene for the first time without ever having rehearsed it.
Oh, no rehearsals.
No, you're just running through it. You're doing it, and then you're like, and then they're running through a couple times doing adjustments. But
yeah.
So I'm playing the scene and like what I think it's supposed to be. And and everyone's watching because they need to know how to light it, what the blocking is going to be. Then we adjust a couple things. We did it maybe a handful of times. And they're like, all right, we're going to light, go, and then like 2 hours later, where all the adrenaline and all the things that is driving the thing like dissipates, you have to come back and do the stupid scene that you've done like 3 times ever. So like part of it is also just staying focused and remember like these are the things I did so I can bring that energy back because it was a high stakes scene.
Yeah. Like, well, I mean, and the other actors can help you with that too. Like Brett Gelman was a crazy man in that scene, right? So that helps get you there too. I think actors have to support each other in that. And I think
absolutely.
You got it.
Yeah. But it's like, but you look at these people who have like attained this huge level of success and recognizability and like, because you're surrounded by people who are like stars. And you try not to compare yourself. But like in this moment, I'm in the scene with you. We're the same. In this moment, we are the same. And that's really exciting. And you just try to hold on to that energy for those 2 hours that you're waiting, but you relax and whatever. And you come back and you shoot it. And yeah, I was like, it all went super smoothly. Like I was really happy with I was just like, I think I did okay. And I remember, but I was afraid to watch it back. And when it finally came out, I'm like, oh, I'm doing okay. Like I was happy with it because it's so hard to watch yourself sometimes, and you think, oh, I wish I'd done this differently. But I'm like, all of that's good. The only thing is that they steamed my outfit and it stretched out, and I look like a child wearing an adult's uniform. But fortunately, I'm sitting, so you can't see most of it. But I had a stunt double because I get punched out, and they had somebody come in who looked very similar to me.
Did you offer to take the punches too?
No. Stay in your lane.
That's right. Don't annoy them too much. Can I do that? I have FOMO. I want to be a stunt person.
But then I walked around set, and I kind of looked around and I saw the other spaces. And the cool thing is that the Duffer Brothers were directing my episode. They were directing 2 different scenes at the same time. They had 2 sets of monitors. So they had the B camera team recording some stuff in the monster pit, and then the A camera doing the stuff in the control room prison. And they were just watching both things.
Yeah, and maybe that's standard operating procedure for that production, but also during COVID, it's probably like, all right, everyone's...
Oh, they lost like 7 or 8 months because of COVID.
Yeah. So you gotta make hay while everyone's testing negative, I guess.
But they did say that, like, in chatting with them, because they're like, you meet them like, oh, they're just like some dudes, like normal guys who just have this major property on their hands. Because they had the pandemic, it gave them the time to like finish writing the whole thing. So all 9 episodes for season 4 were written as just like one giant movie, essentially. And they can jump around and shoot all around because the locations keep changing. So they know exactly where everything's going to end.
Yeah. So they can probably do block shooting too. They don't have to shoot, just this episode. They can get an episode ahead if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's smart. Well, that's amazing, and congratulations. Thanks for representing Minnesota.
Sure. I was very proud of. I mean, like, again, like, coming back, you asked me about like what, like, conventions and all. Like, I don't feel like my part was big enough where somebody would want my autograph. It was very exciting to be asked that, but like, I'm very glad to have represented in a way and still feel, like, get to have this small piece of this major thing that will live on forever.
This is my segue to get back to the Guthrie, but, stage and theater, very ephemeral. One performance, gone forever. Next performance, gone forever, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. Sometimes they film them, but that's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you got to be part of a property that is certainly going to outlive you, right?
Yeah.
And be in, the books for basically forever as one of the biggest TV shows of all time. Talk about that dichotomy. I don't know if you've thought about it too much, but, having something that is etched in stone in Stranger Things, and then doing a performance at like the Guthrie and Into the Woods where every night is different and it's gone.
Well, the benefit of the ephemeral nature of theater is that if you fuck up, next time you get to do differently, or you get to make a different choice that time. Like, there's something really exciting because you're putting it out live to a group of people that are right there watching you, and it's so, like, there's a excitement in that, and there's also a palpable energy in it because your audience their presence is felt.
It's an exchange.
It is an exchange of energy. It's really exciting in that regard. And I think there's an exchange with the camera as well that's different, that's more perceived maybe, but I think like you feel the energy with the crowd. So I think that's very exciting. And sometimes when you have like a great show and you're like, God, I want to repeat everything I did, you're bound for not repeating it because every day you do the show, you're a little bit in a different spot. You try to fill the rubric that you've set up for yourself, but like every performance is going to be a little bit different. Your voice might feel differently. You might something might hurt differently, or the other actor made a slightly different choice. And if you're in the moment, you're going to respond to it a little differently too. So that's what's exciting. It's like there's a sense of play that you get to do every day.
Yeah, and the unexpected. Anything can happen, right? And you have to be on your toes, willing to pivot or figure out, like, somebody might forget their line. How do you respond to that?
The nice thing with, like, when you're on camera, if something gets screwed up, you can stop. And when you're on stage, you're just going. You don't get to stop.
Yeah. There's no breaks.
Yeah.
Yeah. For the people that don't know, my first movie, you had done some film at that point.
I had. Was that your first movie?
Yeah, I'd done some shorts.
Okay.
But definitely the first feature, Ghost from the Machine, came out in 2010, I think.
Yeah.
You were the lead in this supernatural drama, and, a small crew, no money, Do you remember kind of the? I think we auditioned you, or maybe I just met with you.
I auditioned.
Yeah.
I auditioned. I think in that space, in that office in Bloomington.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I came in and read it, and it was the scene where I am talking to my neighbor about, like, do you ever think that there's things, like it's actually the speech that like basically structures the trailer for the movie.
Yep.
Ultimately. And that's a scene actually I really love in that movie. I think like that always felt like this is like it just felt really right. All the pieces were there. Yeah, I auditioned for it, and I think I got cast shortly thereafter. And then I remember you and I having multiple meetings about the character and the script, because I was trying to figure out the logic of why things were happening. And I remember really like feeling like I was pushing hard sometimes, and I was probably being frustrating, but I always really appreciated your patience and willingness to talk through things and, say yes sometimes and say no others. Like, that was my favorite part of working with you, is that you were so open to collaborating and letting other people's opinions and viewpoints sort of help make this thing collectively.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, having worked with a ton of actors now too, some are more on, this is not derogatory, but more on the high maintenance spectrum, ask a ton of questions, right? And I love that because it means that they're trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer that versus the person that doesn't ask any questions, shows up. And even if they do a fantastic job, I'm like, did we fully pull out everything we needed to?
Yeah.
So I prefer that level of engagement with actors, as long as it's coming from a good place, because we all just want to do a good job. And those sorts of questions force me to justify some of my decisions too, because sometimes you don't know. Yeah. Sometimes there's just like, we'll figure it out, or I'm not sure, but it'll make sense in the end.
I've certainly showed up on set, and especially like in smaller roles, maybe, where you're like, I don't really question. Like, this is pretty straightforward. Like, I know exactly what it is, but I feel like in that particular movie, and maybe why it did have the resonance that it did, is because there was a lot of depth and there was a lot of like emotional intention driving the actions of these people, and I wanted to do it justice, I guess.
Yeah, well, thematically, it was probably the densest thing I've done, right? Because those layers were there.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to speak too highly of my own projects on my own podcast, but I'm proud of what we pulled off.
Yeah.
We made it for $25,000, and it kind of exceeded everyone's expectations.
That, like, we shot 2008 maybe.
Yep.
Something like that. That was just like a really busy time. I was working a lot of stuff. Like, I think back to those years as being some of my favorite in my life, just because, like, I don't know, like I got to work on a lot of cool things, but that particular project just like holds a really special place in my heart.
Yeah, it felt like we did it for the right reasons in a way. I guess maybe we're naive.
I think we did it with heart, like, and the scrappiness of it is what made it special, because we were all like in camp together a little bit,
Yeah, well, it holds a special place for me too, because I did a couple movies after that weren't shot in Minnesota, shot elsewhere. Bigger crews, people were there because they were getting paid. All great people and great experiences, but it didn't have that energy. So
yeah, I think that's something that happens with a lot of first-time projects or early ons, or where, like, even to bring it back to Stranger Things, just like, because I'm a big fan of that show. You watch that first season, it's a lot scrappier. It's a lot lower budget. Like, it's obviously big-ish, but compared to where it is now, where it became one of the most expensive TV shows ever made.
It's a machine.
Yeah, those people were just trying to, you're figuring it out as you go. You don't have a formula for it. And I think that's what makes something really exciting. And a lot of times is what puts directors or even actors on the map, is because they were just kind of like winging it and hoping to make a thing. And maybe it wasn't super polished, but you could see that there was a fire inside that made it special.
A little more punk.
Yeah.
Yeah. Punk filmmaking. I like that. Yeah.
Sometimes you like, and I think as you get older, I don't know if you notice this, is like, you do have a lot of jobs that you show up because you're there to do your job, and then you go home, and it's nice to find, I think it's also humbling sometimes Like, and I think it's important to come back to some of those smaller things that maybe are a little harder and less convenient, and maybe feel a little uncomfortable, because it reminds you of why you're doing it, and it reminds you of why you set out to do the thing, and it kind of brings you back to earth. So I've had those over the course of my life where I've gotten to work on like big stuff or things that felt big, and like, yeah, I'm like on cloud nine, and then you're like, and now I'm just like working for free on this thing, but it's kind of cool, and like I'm loving it.
Yeah. And maybe these people don't know exactly what they're doing, but I'm getting to play.
Yeah.
And I think there's pushing and trying where you're not a cog in this machine. It's a little bit more like jazz band where you're just all playing different instruments, maybe on different levels, but hopefully you coalesce, you know?
Yeah. And you got to put your pride aside. Write that one down.
That's the title of your autobiography,
Yeah.
I think. Put your pride. Is there any advice? I think we've been treading in this water already, but is there any advice you wish you would have received or listened to 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Just be less afraid. And the one thing that I think I wish I had done, and I think I have to continue remind myself about, is to be nicer to myself. Because I'm told a lot that I'm hard on myself. And I think of that, well, like, you have to be hard on yourself to be better. Like, if you're not hard on yourself, you're never going to improve. But
not all the time.
But I have found, and maybe whatever I've done to myself over time, it actually like, it chisels away at you in a way that isn't always healthy. So perhaps I wish that I would have less gray hair at this point if I was a little less hard on myself.
You and me both, brother.
Yeah.
If you weren't an actor, if you weren't in the arts, what would you be doing?
When I think about the things that I really enjoy behind the scenes that aren't performance based, like, I think casting is really exciting. I think design is super exciting, both like from like I used to think like I should go get like a landscape architecture degree or an interior design degree and work on that. I thought like, I think being a real estate agent would be really fun because I love houses and I love that whole world. I mean, that's not super exciting, but you can attain a lot of success and, you know, have a very comfortable life being a real estate agent.
And you have to perform.
And you do have to perform.
Have there been any tools or books or anything that's made your life or, you know, work easier? Anything that sticks out? Well,
I would say one thing that I've certainly learned is, and I think maybe a lot of us are becoming akin to that, if it's the right word, because we have to record so many of our own auditions now, watching yourself back and learning to scrutinize yourself in a healthy way, but also like being able to like see what's good and what's not, and like being able to step back and not and know how to choose the right take, and then actually know how to replicate that either in another take for an audition, or if you get the job, to do the thing that you did. Like, being able to do that as a skill that I think has been really helpful for myself, because a lot of times, especially to people who don't perform, like, you record them like, hey, watch this back, and they're like, I can't look at myself. I hate the sound of my voice. To learn to listen to your voice and look at your image on screen and scrutinize it for the right ways in order to give a better performance is a really good skill that I think I've learned over time. So that's one thing. I personally believe that people who are interested in doing commercial work or film should try to do some live theater. I think it's really helpful. I mean, I'm not the first person to say that, but I know that you'll learn a lot from that process of being in the room, because you don't always get the luxury of having the kind of rehearsal process in film, or certainly on TV, or like commercial work that you do when you're working on a play. But the skills that you pick up from that are really important.
Yeah, to me, and you know infinitely more about this than I do, but it's about preparation and then being in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And those are two skills that film actors absolutely need, but sometimes you don't get the prep that you do in theater. And then you discount being in the moment because you can do another take.
In 2019, I was in a show that I had done several times prior called All Is Calm, The Christmas Truce of 1914. I think you've seen it. It's this fully sung through all male a cappella piece about the World War I Christmas truce. I had a panic attack on stage, which I'd never had before. And I completely blanked. And the show's going, and you're like, I don't know what's next. I don't know what's next. Oh my God. And then you're like, but all of a sudden your mouth starts singing the next thing. You're like, okay. But you're thinking like, I don't know what the next line is. And it's now I have to go up and say my line. And the line is coming out of my body. And now I'm saying it. I did about 45 minutes in that mode. It was awful. I screwed up a couple things, but no one noticed. And I was like in tears afterwards. I was like, because I had never experienced anything like that. And then closing night, that feeling comes creeping back, and I'm telling myself, like, no, you can't screw this up for me. It's closing night. Like, you're talking to yourself. And I got through the show, and I was really nervous, but I got through it. And then pandemic hits, and you don't perform for a while. And my first show back was that show again, because it's a holiday show that's done. And I'm like, it's going to happen again. Like, I just lost so much trust in my own ability to remember. And it's a show that I knew, like, deep down. And at that point, I had no, I don't think I had started seeing a therapist yet, but I think I had gone to, I'm trying to remember, I think I had gone to, like, urgent care about anxiety, and they, like, gave me, like something to, like, reduce my anxiety, but I still had, like, major pangs about forgetting. I learned that, like, my body, if you do the work, if you do that preparation you're talking about, you learn the text, you learn the emotional beats, you learn the story, you learn what the dynamics of the show are. You don't just know it here. Your whole body, you know it here. Your body knows it. Your muscles know it. Your hands know it. So, and that's when I started finally understanding, like, being in the moment. Like, you do your homework and you put it aside. I've heard that so many times in acting class. I'm like, what the fuck? What does that mean? What do you mean put it aside? I have to know how to do this thing.
It's part of me.
But what you do is, like, you prepare all that stuff, and then you just trust that it's gonna come out. And I found that, like, if this is so pathetic because I would have learned this, like, decades ago. If you learn a show in a way, or a script, if you're working in a movie, if you know it, like, you understand the emotional intention, you understand why things are happening, the motivations of things, that is actually what's going to help you tell the story better, and it will help you know the lines. Because you don't know it as just sounds. There's a reason for why you're saying something. There's a reason why you're responding. If you really listen to what that person is saying to you, you'll have the response for them. And I found in the last few shows that I've done, it actually has taken a lot of pressure off having to know it, because everyone else knows the show and you're just responding to it. And all that stuff that you did will come out. And it's been a really cool thing to discover. And I hope it's made me better.
Yeah. I mean, do you know where that anxiety came from?
I don't know where it came from. But I've learned to live with it, and I've learned to almost surf it.
Mm-hmm.
You harness it.
Yeah, you don't want to deny it, right? Because
you can't. It's gonna get worse.
Right. It's on the shoulder. It's sitting there, like, hey, buddy.
And my thing is that, like, in case little buddy comes back, if I do all the work, then little buddy just gets to watch. They don't get to interfere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the part about the body knows, because something with the performance, right? It's not just intellectual; it's a full body experience.
Yeah,
that's fascinating, huh? Well, thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
All right, I think final question.
Okay.
This is the part of the show where I ask you to shout out, like, a cool Minnesotan thing, like a restaurant or a band or a show or just anything that you feel like doesn't get enough attention or people should check out.
One of the things that I'm always bragging about when it comes to talking about Minnesota to other people is, like, the art scene here. in the theater scene. And I've always thought that Minneapolis is a great place to come develop new work. And there's a company that I have bias about because I've worked with them called Trademark Theater, that is doing like work that few companies are doing on the level that they're doing. And for example, right now, their entire season is just workshops of new work. They commission work, they develop stuff. And I think that's really exciting because there are already companies that are, doing shows that are pre-existing and so forth. But this is a company that is small, but is producing the kind of caliber of work that I've been proud to present in working with them. So I got to do a shout out to Trademark Theater.
Love it.
And let's see.
Any restaurants?
Restaurants,
lately?
man. Do you have one? You do one, as I'm sure it's different for each time.
Yeah. We went to Colita for the first time a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
That was incredible.
So I was a tour guide in college, and I think that's actually one of the things that prepared me for a lot of the things that I've done in life. Like I was like a TV show host. I learned it from being a tour guide in college, just without the walking backwards part. But
an HGTV TV host, nonetheless.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Which is great.
Yeah,
yeah.
I feel like it's in a different life. So like when I think about, and I run an Airbnb, so like I'm always telling people, you got to check this out. I think Kwong Deli is some of the most consistently solid food I've had in the Twin Cities. If you love Vietnamese food, if you love pho or noodle salads, banh mi, and if you eat pork, their grilled pork chop is the best of any I've ever had. And then lastly, this isn't a restaurant or a bookstore or anything, but for anyone who doesn't live in Minnesota, and they come to visit, make sure to go downtown and walk down the Stone Arch Bridge to the center and look around and realize just how special this city is.
Yeah. I proposed to my wife on the Stone Arch Bridge. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's beautiful. St. Anthony, Maine is beautiful. The other side of the rivers
the falls are beautiful. And like that's the Mississippi River. And if you've got the time, drive up north to Lake Itasca, where the Mississippi River is a little brook that you can just walk across, and it'll blow your mind that the Mississippi River is like 6 inches deep.
I went up there a couple years ago with my kids, and one of them fell in walking across those stones. And it's so shallow, it doesn't matter. But I'm like, you just fell into the Mississippi. And that's the story we still tell. So yeah, those are great, great things I think people should take advantage of.
This has been really
really
lovely.
Thanks for being here. This was awesome. We've known each other for a long time, but I learned a bunch of new things. And thank you for sharing your journey and being vulnerable and all those. I think this was killer.
And now we have to do a sequel to Ghost from the Machine.